the last emperor killed his daughter, then hanged himself. When Beijing was days away from falling, the Ming emperor called his ministers together and asked them one thing: contribute personal funds, pay the army, save the empire. Not one of them gave a single coin. When the city fell, soldiers searched those same ministers' homes. What they found inside would have paid the army many times over. Hidden vaults, buried silver, hoarded wealth. There was enough money to save everything. They chose to save themselves instead. This is the story of how the greatest dynasty in Chinese history didn't fall to its enemies. It was abandoned by its own people, one small decision at a time. At its peak, the Ming Dynasty ruled 200 million people. It built the Forbidden City. It completed the Great Wall. It sent fleets so large, no navy in the world could match them. For 276 years, it was the greatest empire on earth. And then, on a single morning in April 1644, the last emperor walked into a garden behind his palace and hanged himself from a tree. He was 33 years old. He left a note that said, "I die unable to face my ancestors." This is the story of how that happened. Not through invasion, not through war, but through the slow, quiet failure of millions of people, each making small decisions that together destroyed everything. Imagine living inside a system that is slowly failing, but you can't see the whole picture. You only see your part, your village, your job, your responsibility. A farmer notices his harvest is smaller. An official notices the numbers don't match reality. A soldier notices the supplies have stopped arriving. Each person feels something is wrong, but no one understands how big the problem is, and no one has the power to fix it. In 1368, the Ming Dynasty rose from the ashes of Mongol occupation. It unified a broken country. It fed, governed, and protected 200 million people. By any measure in human history, it was an extraordinary achievement. But 276 years later, it was gone. And the way it ended tells us something important, not just about China, but about how power works and how it fails. The empire at its height. Before we talk about how it collapsed, we need to understand what it was. The Ming Dynasty didn't just govern China. It defined China. It built the Forbidden City, 980 rooms, 72 hectares, constructed in 14 years. It rebuilt the Great Wall into the structure that still exists today. It launched the largest naval fleet the world had ever seen. 300 ships, 28,000 men, decades before Europe had anything comparable. At its peak, Ming China produced a third of the world's entire economic output. Its civil service was the most sophisticated bureaucracy on earth. Stability, order, continuity. For generations, that was the Ming promise, and for most of its history, it kept it. The system that demanded perfection. The Ming system didn't just expect obedience. It expected perfection. Officials were trained to follow rules, to maintain order, to report upward, and for a long time, that worked. But perfection creates a specific kind of pressure, because when the system demands perfect results and reality stops delivering them, there's no safe way to say so. So people hide the gap instead. A local official sees crops failing, but reporting failure could end his career. So he adjusts the numbers, just slightly, not to deceive, but to survive. And in that moment, the system doesn't get fixed, it gets distorted. One adjusted number becomes 2, 2 become 10, and slowly, the reports flowing up to the emperor. Stop. describing the empire as it is. They described the empire as it's supposed to be. The famine that changed everything. In 1628, the rains failed across northern China, not for one season, for years. Harvests collapsed, rivers dried, villages emptied, and the reports flowing to Beijing, they showed everything was fine, because the officials who wrote them needed them to say everything was fine. The farmers knew the truth. The soldiers knew. The local magistrates knew. But the system had been trained to hide bad news for so long that when real catastrophe arrived, no one knew how to report it honestly. 25 million people would die in the collapse that followed. It began here, with a drought, and with a system too afraid of its own truth to respond to it. Small lies, catastrophic outcomes. No one decides to destroy an empire. It happens in smaller moments. A clerk rounds a number. A governor delays a report. A minister approves a figure he knows is wrong, because questioning it would raise questions about him. Each decision feels reasonable, even necessary, because each person is just trying to protect themselves. But systems don't measure intentions. They measure outcomes, and when enough people protect themselves at the same time, the system stops protecting anyone. The Ming treasury began to empty, not because the wealth was gone, but because the wealth was being hidden. Officials who were paid to govern the empire were using the empire's final years to secure their own futures. When survival replaces loyalty, there's a point in every collapsing system where survival becomes more important than rules. A farmer looks at his starving children and stops thinking about the empire. He stops paying his taxes, not because he wants to rebel, but because he has nothing left to give. Another family leaves their village, then another, then 10 families together, not to fight, just to find food, and slowly, those groups become something else. Not citizens, not subjects, just people with nothing left to lose. People with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous force in history. The man who understood desperation, Li Zicheng, was not born to lead anything. He was a postal worker, government employed, ordinary life. Then the Ming government, desperate to cut costs, abolished the postal service. He lost his job, he lost his income, he lost his future. So he did what millions of others were doing. He joined the growing groups of displaced, starving men drifting across northern China. And somewhere in that chaos, he discovered something. He could lead. More than that, he understood something the government had missed completely. People weren't loyal anymore. They were desperate. And he knew how to speak to desperation. He didn't promise glory. He promised 3 things: food, fair taxes, land. That was enough. Within years, his army grew from hundreds to thousands, to hundreds of thousands, to 1 million men. A postal worker. 1 million men. Because he offered the one thing the empire no longer could. A reason to believe things could be different. The silver that could have saved everything. By early 1644, the walls were closing in. Li Zicheng's army was moving toward Beijing. The Ming treasury was empty. The army hadn't been paid in months. The emperor did something that should have been simple. He called his ministers together, and he asked them to contribute personal funds to pay the soldiers, to save the empire. Not one of them gave a single coin. These were the men who had served the dynasty for decades, who had built their careers inside its system, who had grown wealthy in its service, and not one of them gave a coin. When Beijing fell to Li Zicheng's forces weeks later, his soldiers began searching the estates of those same ministers. What they found was staggering. Hidden vaults, buried silver, hoarded wealth. Enough, by some estimates, to have paid the army many times over. Enough to have changed what happened. They had chosen not to spend it. The empire died. Not because there was no money, but because the people entrusted with it had already decided to save themselves. The final morning, April 25th, 1644. Before dawn, Li Zicheng's forces entered Beijing. The emperor, Chongzhen, was 33 years old. He had ruled for 17 years, longer than anyone expected, given what he'd inherited. He had tried to stop what was happening. He had executed ministers, appointed new generals, sent desperate orders. None of it had worked. Because you cannot fix a system by changing the people at the top, when the failure is in the system itself. That night, he gathered his family. He told his sons to disguise themselves and flee. He told his concubines to take their own lives before the soldiers reached them. He turned to his 15-year-old daughter, Princess Changping, and he raised his sword. "Why were you born into my family?" he said. He struck her. She survived, barely. Then the emperor walked out of the palace, alone. He climbed the hill behind the Forbidden City, and he hanged himself from a tree. In his final note he wrote, "I die unable to face my ancestors. Remove my imperial cap and cover my face with my hair. Let the rebels dismember my body, but do not harm a single one of my people." This is how the Ming Dynasty ended. Not with a battle, not with a treaty, with a father raising a sword at his daughter, and a man who had once commanded the most powerful empire on earth, hanging alone from a tree. Conclusion. The Ming Dynasty didn't collapse in one event. It collapsed in the decisions people made when they were trying to survive. A clerk adjusting a number, an official hiding bad news, a minister choosing his private vault over his emperor's army. No single decision destroyed it, but together they made it impossible to save. And that's what makes this story so hard to look away from, because no one planned for it to end this way. The ministers who hoarded silver weren't evil men. They were frightened men. The officials who falsified reports weren't traitors. They were protecting themselves inside a system that punished honesty. Everyone was rational. Everyone made sense. And together, they built a catastrophe. This is how power fails. Not loudly, not suddenly, but quietly, slowly, through a million small choices, made by people who were just trying to get through another day. Until one morning, an emperor climbs a hill, and there's no one left to stop him.